Earlier in my real estate career, I learned to never trust a trust. And this does come up sometimes. So obviously now, there's things that I've learned to pay closer attention to. But there was a property that I was selling, it's kind of a higher end property, mid-range to high end, and had a buyer come in, cash buyer. So for a cash buyer, you don't get a lender approval letter before entering into a contract. You get a proof of funds. So it's some kind of proof that they have an account with at least enough money to buy the property. So this particular account, if I remember right, had 2 or 3 times the amount of money needed to buy the property. It had this person's name on it. Seems legit. So we do the normal stuff. Enters into a contract, things are moving along, but then the buyer wants to move in early. So there's a way to do that. They moved in early with what's called a buyer's temporary residential lease. So sellers agreed, pros and cons for doing or not doing buyer temp lease. And this is obviously one of the cons right here, because the buyer moves in like all this mega furniture, like a lot of furniture and all this stuff. And then we get ready to close the deal and we can't close. The funds can't be transferred. Funds can't be released from where they're being held. Turns out where they're being held is a trust account that the client never actually had control of. The client's name was on it, but never actually had control of the account. That control went to the trustee who had never approved any of this. So unbeknownst to me and the sellers. So now we have an issue and we can't get the deal closed. We extended, tried to give time for the buyer to work things out with the trustee. Couldn't get worked out. Eventually, we decide we have to terminate this deal. It's not going to close. So we get termination. Okay, so we terminate the deal and house goes back on the market. New buyers come in. They want to buy the house. We let them know, hey, the previous buyer is still needing to move out. Not out yet, supposed to be out by the end of the week. So the new buyers are like, that's okay, let's do this. So we sign a new contract with the new buyers. Then the first buyer's like, you know what, I didn't terminate. Like, no, you did, you terminated. And so now we've got an issue. So we're like talking to lawyers and this person is not moving out of the house, right? The new buyer's aware of this and we're trying to resolve it, but we're not getting anywhere. There's no progress being made to get this first buyer out of the house, and the second buyer is still wanting to buy it. Now we've got a contract to sell it to him. And then the family of the first buyer flies into town and they're like, hey, we know what is going on. We want to try to resolve this. We'll buy the house, right? So essentially they'll make good on the original contract. And I was like, okay, that would be great, except we have this new contract now with this second buyer and we don't really have a way to get out of it. As a seller, you don't really have a way to back out of a contract, not legally. What we did have was an appraisal that was still going to happen. So the appraisal happens and it comes in a lot lower, almost miraculously. This would usually never be a good thing. The appraisal came in a lot lower than our second contract price. Okay, so now the seller has a way where they can say, okay, well, we don't want to reduce, because they know they can sell it to the first buyer for a higher price. And it's kind of better to sell it to the first buyer because we can't get this buyer out of the house, right? So they tell the second buyer, we're not going to reduce. We're not going to reduce to appraised value. So the second buyer's like, well, then we're not going to buy the house. And they're like, we understand. So they terminate, and the first buyer, who never did move out, ends up getting bailed out of the situation. Their family buys the house. Sellers are good. My stress level went from 1,000 back to 74, where it normally is, 74, 75. And I learned a lot and will never again trust a trust.